If I told you that there was a groundbreaking contemporary art exhibition just a few blocks down from where you live, what are the chances you'd actually go and have a look? Perhaps, like me, you've always had a sense that there is an enormous gulf between contemporary art and many, many people. The problem is that without proof, without facts and figures to go on, it seems that nobody is going to be able to blow the whistle and come up with a strategy for treating the root cause of this disconnect. This is why, for the past 8 years, I've been trying to get right down to the fundamental issues at play here. It's involved questioning a lot of assumed wisdom about the history of art and how we learn to be creatively confident. And it begins here, with a yellow square. This yellow square represents the number of people who walk through the doors of a free, internationally prominent contemporary art gallery somewhere in the UK in 1 year. And the blue square represents the number of people who walk through the doors of a shop, a store, of about the same size, in the same location, selling non-essential goods. That's quite a gap, isn't it? The thing is that that gap is so big, and these results are so repeatable in broad terms wherever I've tried the test, I don't think it's fair to blame galleries, museums, or contemporary artists. I think that this is a societal issue, which goes much deeper, caused not by visual illiteracy or by a cynical art world conspiracy, but by disappointment at school and a kind of cultural hiccup that happened 150 years ago, leading to two perfectly legitimate notions of quality. One, commonly accepted by the art world, and the other, used by almost everybody else.
I wouldn't be excited if I saw this at all. I wouldn't even look at it like it's a piece of art.
Somebody's reversed with the lorry full of very heavy beams into a road sign. It just looks like something that's happened.
To be honest, I don't have a clue why it's there. It looks like it's just been thrown there to barricade something.
Alright, okay, that is a pile of bricks, but that doesn't look like art to me. That looks like a building project waiting to happen.
No, it's not. It's nothing, is it?
It just looks like bricks. It looks like Jenga, but on a lower level.
Just looks like bricks, and there's like different shades of the bricks, and the light shining on it.
Yeah.
And the symmetry.
You're hearing the voices of 6 individuals from a pool of several hundred who have been helping me with my research since 2016. I've used these recordings because they are indicative of the general opinions that seem to be coming across. That rather than being switched off to culture, most people are switched on to ideas of artistic quality that seem to have nothing to do with what our cultural institutions are promoting.
Is that an oil painting?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very good. I like that. Lots of detail, very nice colours. I like that.
How an artist can create light like that with paint is beyond me. Proper art.
This is art, and the first 3 I would say aren't.
Is there a specific reason why?
Because I can appreciate the skill involved to be able to do that, whereas the others, I'm pretty sure I could replicate them.
It's very beautiful. It looks like a photo.
Yeah.
That's like the picture my sister did of my dad.
Would you say that was art?
Yeah, definitely.
That's not a photograph. That's quite amazing. If somebody painted that, that is epic.
That's been so well drawn and painted.
The thing is that when we set out to decide for ourselves what is worth looking at, and what can be ignored, the first things we run into are the problems and evident skill involved in recognisable, realistic drawings and paintings. And we only have to look back at some of the greatest and most radical artists of the past 100 years to see that they too faced and came through exactly the same challenges.
Would you say that there is this notion that realistic painting is good painting?
Yeah, I think certainly looking at good quality painting, they do see that as something to aspire to, yes. Yeah.
And seeing the skill in something.
Seeing the skill in what's involved, yes.
But I seem to remember a lot of people were doing more traditional landscape or portraiture or even still life. And that was quite obvious that was what the teacher wanted.
Can you put your finger on what very generally, what that sense was when you were sort of in your early teens? Was a realistic painting a good painting? Or?
Yeah, I think a realistic painting is a good painting.
Yeah.
The idea is that skill and quality is marked by realism and how real you can make it, how like your reference you can make it, because you don't have that comprehension of every art, you've not explored it in detail. It is how you can immediately recognise how good a piece of art is.
But should any of this come as a surprise when we realise that a fascination for realism, the trick of making a three-dimensional world on a two-dimensional surface, runs at least 600 years back in Western culture? And this is to say nothing of the fact that the urge to remake the world so that others will know that we have seen it as they have is just about the oldest thing we have come to know about our species. We seem to be hardwired, almost as deeply as our instinct to take pleasure in the smell of a rose or the warmth of the sun on our skin, to be fascinated by images made by hand which look like the world. Oh my God, is that a painting? How has someone done that? I mean, how is it possible? These are the perfectly legitimate questions derived from our ancient attraction toward realism, which, I believe, undercut attempts to bridge the gap and bring more people to contemporary art. But why can't our cultural institutions spot these problems, acknowledge them, and answer the questions that people seem to want to ask? Well, to tackle that, I'm going to have to go back a bit. By the late 1800s, the camera seemed to be changing everything that artists had previously taken for granted. Almost overnight, it became possible for anyone to make an accurate depiction of the world at the push of a button. Those in the know believed that accurate depiction for its own sake was no longer an important thing for an artist to do. And in a heartbeat, art exploded with a new sense of purpose, new ways of making images, new ways of seeing. But I'd like to propose that perhaps they had missed something. What if, in their haste to move away from purely realistic depiction, no one had had the time to think about how deep our instinct toward it actually goes? Nowadays, of course, we're a good deal further down that line. And maybe the reason for the disconnect between contemporary art and so many people is that the entire apparatus of galleries, museums, and contemporary artistic practice as we know it today began 150 years ago as a reaction against purely realistic depiction, so that now the entire art world is ill-equipped to answer, empathise with, or even acknowledge people's first and most fundamental questions about art. How is a painting like this made? How difficult is this sort of painting? Could I do something like this? And perhaps, most poignantly of all, why isn't this just a joke by comparison? I don't think it's blasphemy to say that this leaves us with an art world who are keen to engage the public, but unwilling to renegotiate their founding principles of artistic quality in order to do so. Why might they need to do this? Well, because on the other side of the coin, I believe, is a vast majority of people who ally themselves to exactly the skills of realistic depiction which were written out of the DNA of contemporary art all those years ago. Not because they don't know any better, but because an instinct towards skill, toward craftsmanship, toward recognisable images of the world, is more or less written into our DNA. And so contemporary art has resisted an essential truth for nearly 150 years. So how do we move on from here? We seem to be at loggerheads. Well, I think one way to understand that these two viewpoints are not, in fact, diametric opposites, but interrelated, is to look again at artists like Picasso, and to try to understand exactly why he moved from this to this. And then perhaps to use that pattern of personal development as a sort of template to build a new kind of strategy for bridging the gap between the general public and contemporary art. I would say that in no small part what allowed Picasso to move beyond realism was a feeling of having conquered it. Which is to say, he acquired a sense of personal authority born from tactile experience of the medium. Time after time, whichever way I cut it, I always seem to end up thinking about school art classes, and why so many people over the years have approached me, congratulated me on the realism of my paintings, before telling me that their experiences of school involved just a few children passing through the eye of the needle, and the rest, including themselves, ending up in a swamp of disappointment, simply because they couldn't draw a bowl of fruit or a stuffed animal realistically enough, and that's what was perceived as quality. All of these assumptions were just that for many years. They rattled round in my head. I tried to quiet them by going to the studio every day and making my paintings, but always with a nagging sense of just how many people might not grant themselves the permission to go and have a look at them when they were finished. And then, in 2014, I found a way to ask new questions about these assumptions and to test them. Thanks to the comparator mirror, the little device at the centre of Tim Jenison's fascinating research into Vermeer, I was able to ask the question, how would it be if learning to draw and paint realistically was as commonplace in everyone's childhood as learning to bake a cake or ride a bike? But before I get stuck into the second half of this film, and because the comparator mirror will soon be available to buy, I want to point out that I haven't been motivated by a desire to produce positive promotional material.
When you recognise something deep and heartfelt within yourself in an artwork, it can fill you with hope. But what's necessary for an artwork to deliver its payload is that you get physically close to it, like within about 2 or 3 feet of it actually, which is to say that you need to feel a sense of permission about walking through the doors of a gallery.
What I'm trying to do instead is first to test my assumptions about public opinion being in opposition rather than apathetic toward contemporary art, and then to try to find a new way to create a sense of permission around creativity and culture for every child in a class of 14-year-olds from experiences of personal authority over the medium of paint. If you found this video interesting and engaging, or if you have opinions which differ totally from what I've proposed, leave me a comment. Do subscribe, and if you want to, hit that notification bell. The second part of this film will be coming just as soon as I can have it done, probably a matter of weeks now. In it, I'm going to be discussing 6 years of research into the comparator mirror as a teaching aid, showing interviews with students and with teachers, and trying to come to some general conclusions about its relevance and usefulness within the broader aims I've just described in this film. Anyway, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.